Asterisms provide helpful points of reference in the night sky when billions of stars are visible from Earth. And this cataloging procedure, which currently only contains a very small percentage of the stars in the night sky, has been influenced over time by our myths and legends as well as the objects and creatures that make up our earthly life. Despite the fact that most of us are familiar with constellations and their names thanks to the zodiac signs they belong to, there is another visual classification of star configurations. Despite appearing less well known to the general public, astronomers are well aware of the significance and attraction of these structures, known as asteroids. There are 88 constellations that are officially recognized, 48 of which, according to NASA, date back to previous civilizations like the Babylonians and the Greeks. Later, as our understanding of the night sky improved, modern constellations were added. Our culture has an influence on the names of these constellations, which correspond to the patterns or images they appear to form. Western astronomers are most familiar with the names from Greek mythology, despite the fact that other cultures have given the constellations their own names. Thus, we have constellations like Orion the Great Hunter, which is made up of stars that form the stick figure of a man holding a sword and shield and is named after a Greek mythological character with the blood of the gods flowing through his veins. The names of the more modern constellations are taken from less fantastical objects, such as animals and instruments, such as peacocks, giraffes, and telescopes. Later scientists who could utilize optical telescopes to examine the heavens and had access to the southern hemisphere in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s made this discovery. The fact that the constellations and asteroids are unique to our earthly perspective makes them fascinating. Despite appearing to be close together on the 2D sphere of the sky that surrounds Earth, the stars that make up the constellations may in fact be separated by vast cosmic distances. For instance, the stars of the small constellation Triangulum are situated 35 to 127 light-years from Earth. Even while the stars and asterisms frequently appear to be connected in completely random ways, there occasionally is more going on between these stars than first appears. Asterisms are collections of stars, and they can be modest and straightforward, consisting of only a few stars, or huge and complex, many of these constellation patterns taking up a sizable portion of the sky. Stars inside an asterism are frequently comparable in brightness to one another, and they may be bright enough to be seen with the unaided eye or identified using a telescope, according to a recent Space.com report. The stars in an asterism may be placed in random clusters, or they may be physically connected to one another. The Big Dipper, sometimes known as the Plough, is one of the most well-known constellations, or Plough depending on the region of the world you live. The 7 brightest stars in the constellation Ursa Major, also referred to as the Great Bear, make up the Big Dipper, an asterism that is not a constellation. 5 of the stars in the Big Dipper are part of the Ursa Major moving group, often as Colander 285. This cluster of stars is the closest to Earth and is assumed to have a shared origin in space and time due to its similar space velocity. A disputed example of the relationships, or lack thereof, between the stars and an asterism has been provided by the stars that make up the coathanger, the main component of Brocchi's cluster or Colander 399. It was first believed that all of these stars were a part of an open cluster that had formed from the collision of a single, extremely massive and dense cloud of molecular gas. As a result, they would all be around the same age. Only 6 of the coathanger's brightest stars, however, were discovered to be a component of an open cluster in 1970s research. Although there have been numerous updates to this since 1998, everyone now agrees that the stars are arranged at random and have no physical link. The 3 stars that make up the Summer Triangle, an enormous triangle of stars that may be seen in the northern hemisphere's summer skies, are also not physically connected to one another. Because asteroids may not always be found inside the same constellation, thinking of them as a subdivision of constellations is inefficient. The lozenge is an intriguing example of a global asterism. This diamond is made up of the stars Eltanin, Grumium, and Rastaban, 3 from Draco's head and 1 from Hercules' foot. One is almost tempted to speculate about the kinds of tales the Greeks may have invented had they discovered this asterism. Asterisms, like constellations, are groups of stars that resemble well-known celestial objects. One of the main distinctions between constellations and asterisms is that the latter are relatively new, whilst the former frequently trace back to ancient times, as was already mentioned. Their boundaries are not precisely defined, just like constellations. Thus, an asterism is defined as a loose association of stars that seems to come together to form a representation of a known item, such as a picture, figure, or pattern. However, the distinction between constellations and asterisms as the official boundaries of the constellations has only recently been recognized. Despite humanity's ancient history of stargazing, constellations and asterisms were not fully separated until far into the 20th century. Constellations and asterisms were separated into their own categories after the International Astronomical Union and Belgian astronomer Eugene Joseph Delport formalized the number of constellations and their boundaries in 1928. Delport wrote at the outset of his 1930 report, Scientific Demarcation of the Constellations, in their stories, the ancients left us a star-studded sky separated into asterisms, but without any clear-cut borders. For a large number of astronomical activities, like the systematic monitoring of meteors, the study and naming of variables, the observation of novae, etc., the precise delineation of the constellations is of utmost importance. He went on to explain why such a distinction has long been required. Although they are not legally recognized like constellations and their bounds are not as clearly defined, asterisms provide astronomers no less fascinating and appealing topics for their observations. Asteroids have become essential tools for astronomers because they provide sharp visual clues for navigating the night sky. Asterisms are especially important for young and starting astronomers since they are smaller and less scary than constellations, ensuring that future generations will continue to imagine the universe as vividly and imaginatively as our ancestors did. The Big Dipper and Little Dipper in the constellations of and Ursa Minor, which are made up of the 7 brightest stars in Ursa Major, the Great Bear, are arguably the most well-known asterisms, the Little Bear. These asterisms are grouped together in the sky above the northern hemisphere and are plainly discernible. The Southern Cross is a cross or kite-shaped arrangement of 4 brilliant stars that can be seen in the center of the constellation Crux. This asterism has assisted travelers in the south with navigation, just like Polaris does in the north. Contains 10 dazzling stars that are part of the Brachis cluster, which was discovered in 964 AD. 6 stars make up the hanger section of the form, and the remaining 4 stars make up the hook. The finest viewing is from July through August, and it involves cruising between the dazzling stars of Altair and Vega. The International Astronomical Union, IAU, which defined geometric boundaries that ranked every star in each constellation, officially divided the sky into 88 constellations in 1928. Asterisms are generally thought of as any additional freshly picked star clusters or extinct constellations. However, depending on the exact literature source, any technical distinctions between the terms constellation and asterism may remain ambiguous. From dusk till morning, it appears to an observer that the sky revolves around a single point. The Earth's axis is pointed toward the celestial pole in the sky. In the northern hemisphere, Polaris, the pole star, is fairly close to the celestial pole. The southern hemisphere lacks a bright star that would serve as a marker for that location. Constellations known as circumpolar constellations orbit around the celestial pole but do not descend to the nighttime horizon. In other words, an observer will never see these constellations set. Depending on where you are on the planet, different constellations are circumpolar. Cepheus, Draco, Cassiopeia, Ursa Major, and Ursa Minor are the 5 notable circumpolar constellations that reside in the Northern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, there are 3, Crux, Centaurus, and Carina. Some constellations appear to signal the start of seasons, and this has given them a special significance over the years. The optimal times to sow or harvest crops, gather food, or skin animals were determined by ancient peoples using stars or constellations. The Earth's orbit around the Sun causes different constellations to be visible at various times of the year. In the Northern Hemisphere, for instance, the appearance of Orion in the early sky heralds the start of fall and the approaching drop in temperature. The summer triangle growing prominent in the northern sky is a harbinger of summer. Constellations were more than just patterns to ancient cultures because they predicted the onset of the seasons, the turning of the years, and occasionally the change of life itself. That was for today. Thank you for staying with us. Don't forget to like our video and subscribe to our channel.